Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Conversations on Conversations, where each week we explore a topic to help us have more powerful conversations with ourselves and others. I am your host, Sarah Noll Wilson, and this is a long overdue conversation. And I'm so excited that we were able to make it happen. So let me tell you about this week's guest, a little bit about her and what we will be exploring. So our guest this week is Jacquette M. Timmons. And Jacquette is on a mission to change how people think, behave, and talk about money. So we are going to be talking about our relationship with money today. It's why she focuses on the human side of money. She works as a financial behaviorist and is committed to getting you to see that you don't manage your money, you manage your choices around money. Sorry, I needed to catch that. In addition to being an author, she wrote a book, Financial Intimacy, which I cannot wait to dig into this idea of financial intimacy. It's not something you often see together, so I love that. How to create a healthy relationship with your money and your mate. She's a frequent blogger. She's also the creator of Pricing Made Human. PMH is designed to help entrepreneurs and small business owners tackle that question. What should I charge for this? Which I often have had to ask myself and try to answer. And to look at it from all sides, the financial, the emotional, the personal, so that they can price more confidently, strategically, and end up with a thriving business and a thriving life. She also hosts the podcast, More Than Money. So all of these we will share in the show notes so you can check those out. Just a little bit of background, because we got to speak to the credentials. Jacquette she holds an MBA in finance from Fordham's University Graduate School of Business and an undergrad in marketing from the Fashion Institute of Technology. She lives in Brooklyn, New York, and can be seen running in Prospect Park most days of the week. Welcome to the show, Jacquette.
I am so delighted to be here, Sarah. Thank you.
What else would you like people to know about you?
Oh my goodness. What else? I love music. I love all kinds of music. But when it comes to dancing, I particularly love house music.
Okay.
So one of my
I
fantasies.
love the laugh behind it. Is it because people don't expect it? Is there a little bit like, you might not know this about me?
Exactly. And one of my fantasies is to actually go to South Africa to see and hear Black Coffee, the DJ Black Coffee. So that's something that probably some people wouldn't know about me. I love to travel, and I want to now that we are in a different phase of this pandemic, I want to get back to traveling, and I would love to get to a point where I'm going someplace new at least 4 times a year, and new like that. Another country.
Love that.
Yeah.
I'm here for all of that. Now, something for those of you who are listening, and for those of you who may be enjoying this episode via video, can you just feel her smile? I mean, that was one of the things, if you remember the first time that we connected, I was still very much healing from COVID and was still dealing and low energy. And I remember it was just this like shot of joy. That was exactly the balm I needed in that moment.
Thank you.
So I'm so excited. Again, as I mentioned, this was a long overdue conversation because, boy, when we talk about conversations we avoid, and I can't remember if this was a conversation you and I had or if it was, oh no, actually we had a previous guest who is a death doula. She's like, we don't talk about sex, we don't talk about death, and we don't talk about money. Like those are the 3 like areas that we aren't equipped at how to have conversations, again, with ourselves and others. So before we jump into specifically the work you do, walk us back. What was the journey? Where did you start? What was the path that brought you to this point of doing this work that you do so well, of helping people re-examine their relationship with money?
Yeah, it's really interesting because the death doula that you were just referencing, as well as a lot of people often say that we don't talk about money. And I actually think that the truth is we talk about money all the time. We're just not having the right conversations about it. And how that connects to, what put me on this journey, if you will, is really watching the stock market crash of 1987, being really green behind the ears. I'm just a year out of undergrad, don't really know what I'm doing, but I'm on Wall Street and the stock market crashes and people are going crazy. And just seeing drastically different reactions to it, how there was this camp of people that literally, if they could have, they would have jumped out of a window because of how much money they lost for
Mm,
themselves and for their clients. And then there was this other camp of people that were very calm. So you talk about
mm,
conversations. I'm sitting there at 20 years old thinking, well, why are they not talking to one another? Like, why isn't this
mm,
person trying to calm down the one that's all anxious? And what could that calm person perhaps share with the anxious person that would calm them down? And so I didn't have the language back then to really understand what was going on, but it just really, reminded me in hindsight of A, the conversations that we are having, but also B, it's what planted the seed around success with money being about behavior and not just
mm.
about the numbers.
I yeah, it's so interesting. And that was something that when we were prepping for this conversation, right? And I asked you just a few moments ago for people who are wondering. um so say more about that because it is and that, boy, that's true in as an individual to be like, well, how much money do I have in the bank or how much money do I have in savings as a business owner? It's, how much what revenue are we driving? How much profit are we gaining? And while that's certainly important, I am starting to learn and untangle that is not the only measurement of success. So say more and tease that out a bit for us.
Yeah. So, traditional personal finance will have you, and here's where the nuance and a little bit of the conflict comes into play, because traditional personal finance would have you thinking that all you need to do is follow the tenets, and the tenets are pay yourself first, save, have minimal to no debt, and invest. And all of those things are absolutely important to practice.
Mm,
But part of the challenge is that the traditional personal finance route makes it seem as if all you did were those things and everybody would be successful. And it treats money as if it's monolithic. And it isn't,
mm,
because
mm,
we all have different circumstances and then the
mhm,
context of those circumstances are different. And that's what we're bringing to our day to day activity when it comes to money. That's what we're bringing to the decisions that we make, both large and small. That's what we're bringing to the table when we're thinking about, well, what is the role of our business in helping us to achieve our personal financial goals? And I'm of the belief, and this comes from experience, I'm of the belief that actually one of the best business decisions that you can make is to center the health of your personal finances. And the light bulb moment for me was caused by the fact that I had a year where I did really well. My business did really well. And I'm like, but why am I broke?
yeah. Mm. Wow. You're just like
My business
I
did
feel
well.
I feel seen in a way that makes me very uncomfortable. And also, I think I need to send you an invoice for how this conversation is going to play out.
Oh my God. Yeah.
So, yes, continue on for a friend of mine who maybe has experienced something similar.
But it was this really
Mm,
aha moment of wait a second. Like, there's something that's missing here. I am not connecting the dots in the way that I should. And that really led to an examination of my business model, an examination of my sales process, of my pricing. And over time, getting it to a point where I didn't feel like my business was sucking everything out of me. Because I also feel like sometimes the narrative out there is you give your business everything.
yeah.
And yeah, we need to definitely give our business a lot, but we shouldn't also give it our financial future. And I think part of the challenge is figuring out, again, going back to nuance. How do you figure out that dance between what are the sacrifices that you make for your business in the short term, but how do you not let that be the thing that you are doing in a way that also prompts a sacrifice in the future.
Yeah. Boy, I wasn't expecting us to go here, and I'm having some real feelings. I'm having some there's so many, gosh, I'm trying to make notes of, I want to talk about the way we're shamed about money. I
Oh
want to
God,
talk about as a business owner,
yeah.
and even related to that of, so I'll speak from my experience that there is part of, yep, I want to keep investing in my business because I'm making that bet on me, right? I'm making that bet on, and the team now, right? I'm making this bet that if by making this investment, it's going to pay off even bigger in the long term. And I have recognized in myself that sometimes actually I'm investing money back into the business. I'm paying myself less because I'm actually uncomfortable with what maybe I deserve to get. And so there's layers to that, right? Of, yeah, you should, right? You should give everything, back into the business. But I don't. So hypothetically, if you were helping a client struggling with this,
For my friend over there,
for my friend who may have no challenge, no, but you're well, and the other thing that's coming up for me too is, where else are we told to just constantly be giving at the sacrificing of our financial future, our financial stability, our, well-being? Because, it's always funny to me when I hear or read stories about, well, you only need to make this much money to be happy, right? Like after this, it's none. And I was like, I don't know about that. Like,
especially depending upon where you live,
right, where you live, and the kind of, like, not even just the lifestyle, but like who you want to take care of, who do you have to support, who do you want to support. Let's go back to the business is sucking everything. Like, you should give it. You should, why is that an unhealthy or unproductive mindset?
Well, part of the reason is because even if you have a team and even if you are not, quote unquote, the face of your business, you are the driver of it. So you are its biggest asset. And if you are constantly putting the business before taking care of yourself, you are going to reach a point where you are depleted. You are depleted financially, you are depleted energetically, creatively. And then what happens? Then the business doesn't exist. So it might seem like a smart decision in the short term to give it everything, but then you're being short-sighted and you're not thinking about, well, what's in the reserve, in the reservoir for when I need something in the future. And I think the one of the challenges is that, and this is what makes, oftentimes the conversation around pricing really hard, is one of the challenges is it can be masked, right? So it can be masked in that you are, generating revenue, you are profitable. But then if you take a step back and say, okay, but am I paying myself? Am I paying myself as much as I could, given how well the business is doing? Or for many of us, when we started our businesses, we've invested some of our own money, whether it's savings money, whether it's, we took money out of retirement savings or whatever. Have you begun to replenish that? Have you returned your investment to yourself? Or for some folks, you put a pause on long-term investing because you're like, no, I need that cash flow to keep my business going or to take it to another level or to get it through a rough patch. And you have gotten in such a rhythm that you haven't resumed it. So you've now like, oh my God, you look up and 5 years later and you're like, oh wow, I never went back. I had all the good intentions of going back and resuming that, but it stayed on pause for much longer. I don't know one person that hasn't done any variation of those things. And the problem is then that means that you've sabotaged your financial future without even really knowing it.
I have lots of feelings that are coming up because of this conversation that I wasn't expecting to have. And it can be really easy, especially as a small business owner. You know you're going to have lean years. You know you're going to have external factors, pandemics, economic downturns,
Mhm.
whatever the case might be. And I can imagine, and I know it's something I've definitely struggled with, is making sure that I'm not always coming from a scarcity mindset.
Yes.
Especially when you have experienced a lean time, when you
Mhm.
have experienced like, we weren't focused on business development, or we, lost sight on this, or and how easy it can be to, yeah, I mean, boy, I see, yes, I see it. I see that as a challenge that I face as a business owner. I see it in my colleagues, right, that are
Mhm.
like, someday.
Mhm.
And I think that I think what you're hitting on is, unless you're intentional about making someday happen, it may not
It may
happen.
not.
And and I'm reminded of a conversation with a good friend of mine, Rachel Sheeran. She's a really incredible speaker, and we were talking late one night at a like mastermind retreat that we were at, and late night pillow chat. And we were talking about this topic, and Rachel is somebody who has a very different relationship with money, and which I appreciate. And and she was like, "So what's like your goal?" And I said, one of my goals is that I want to make enough financially, not only so that Nick and I are taken care of, but I want to make enough that we can take care of my parents, his parents, if they ever need it. And so we make enough that they wouldn't question us helping and supporting them.
Mhm.
And the thing she pushed me on was like, I hear you making all these investments, and how much more time will you have to take care of your parents? How much more, it was sort of a gut check of, you keep making these investments, and I'm not saying they're wrong, right? To hire people and to do all of this, but at some point, you won't be able to achieve the whole reason like, it's not the whole reason, but one of the reasons that
Mhm.
you started this.
Mhm. That, I think, is talking about having uncomfortable conversations. That's just an uncomfortable reality. And I think,
Yeah.
the goal of wanting to have enough, I would ask, what's your number? And you don't have to share that with us,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
what's your number? Because having a very specific number as
Mm.
opposed to the word enough is
Mm.
what can help to shape, well, what are the decisions and the trade offs that you need
Mm.
to make now to get you closer to that number? And there may be a different number that's the target for what you and Nick need. And there may be a different number that's the target for your parents and his parents. And literally, if you were to have three buckets and know what that number
Mm.
is, and then, reverse engineer to, well, where are we starting from? Even if that starting point is
Mm.
zero, like don't discount
Mm.
the power of, okay, I'm starting from zero. It's okay to start from
Yeah.
zero.
Yeah.
Um, it can give you a sense of reality checking the timeline that you have, whether it is maybe the number can't be as high as I want it to be if I want that number to be hit in 10
Mm.
years, or maybe if I'm giving it 20 years, I, can give myself some assurance that I can hit it. Like you once you have a number, you can stress test your time frame for getting from where you are to
Mm.
where you want to be. And that specific number is not about certainty, but it is directional, and it's about giving you clarity again for those choices
Mm.
and those trade-offs. So, I would say for all of us to just be really mindful of when we say, I just want enough, that we go
Yeah.
to the next level and actually put a dollar amount on that enough. And it can change, but you got to have a starting point.
I
The
I'm a
look on
little
your
speech
face.
I'm a little speechless. What one part, um and this is what I love about how you approach your work And people listening, you can hear it in how she's explaining things, is that human side of it and the reality and the challenges, because I'm on Twitter and I get all of these Twitter bro threads that show up on my feed, even though I don't follow or, and sometimes there's a lot of shame. Sometimes, well, there's also a whole ton of ignoring privilege and access to resources and all of that. And so part of my pause is I just so appreciate the humanity you bring in with the humanity you bring in with the practices and also the nuances. I would be remiss if I didn't go back to something you said that bears repeating, which is, defining that number is not about certainty, it's directional. And boy, did I have a strong reaction of how applicable just that concept is to lots of areas in our life. And that reality check. My colleague, Dr. Teresa Peterson and I, we were just talking recently in another context, not related to finances, but just this idea of how do we take a more balanced mindset instead of it being a positive mindset, but a more balanced mindset to situations where we are balancing the optimism, the goal with the reality. And I appreciate that check of, you may have that goal, you may have that number, and you may have to reassess how you get there, or you may have to reassess that maybe that actually isn't the number right now. And maybe that's and I appreciate that. And, and then what are the sacrifices? What's the starting point? Because, when, as a elder millennial, we've been told so much, just stop buying the avocado toast, just stop going to Starbucks, stop going to whatever. And not taking into account, one, where did you come from? Where did you start?
Exactly.
Right? We are not all starting from the same place. Our families are not starting from the same place. We know that with inflation, right? We know wages have been stagnant for so long. And again, and that has impacted different groups very differently in different industries and sectors very differently. And, and just costs, right? The cost of education is gone up so much. The cost of housing has gone up. I look at the house we're in, we wouldn't be able to afford this house anymore.
I live in Brooklyn, New York.
And we've only been here 6 or 7 years.
Yeah, I live in Brooklyn, New York. I live in Park Slope, and everybody's always like, "Ooh, Park Slope." And yeah, I love it. And I've been here since 85. I could not move into my neighborhood at the price of rent or even to buy versus when I moved in here in 1985. Just couldn't.
Yeah.
And yeah, you're right. Going back to the nuance, there's the pieces of the conversation that are omitted, whether it's intentional or not, are really important pieces to not overlook. And when you mentioned the shame, I think about the shame that goes along with when you tell people, well, don't buy that latte because if you do that, then you can't save. First of all, why does it have to be either or? Why can't there be a little bit of both and? But the other thing is, people, I think, sometimes don't realize the damage that's done when you shame people in general, but when you shame starting with just a little. And again, that's why I emphasize the point of it's okay to start from zero. Because on some level, we're starting from zero in a lot of different things. If you're creating a new offer or a new product or a new talk, you're starting from zero.
I love all of that. And so what are the components that we omit consciously, unconsciously, or we don't take into consideration either for ourselves or for others where they're at? Let's just name those.
Well, one, someone's circumstances and context. Right. So it's just
Yeah.
like, when some people comment on other people's health or not wealth, health or fitness. It's just like, well, you don't know if they've got a medical condition that you are not aware of that
Mm,
might be causing them to either look the way that they look or, to have the response to exercise the way that they have. Like, there's just so much that you don't know. And so I think in terms of the piece that's missing, it is not being aware of how you might be projecting what's
yeah.
worked for you and, being unaware of what that person is making work given their circumstances. Because, like, if we bring it back to money, you don't know if not only are they growing a business and taking care of their family, but maybe they are taking care of a sick parent
Yeah.
and it's taking financial resources. So I don't know if that answers your question, but to me, that's a piece that's missing. Like, not really um, paying attention to what assumptions or projections that
Mhm.
we might make as an outsider, seeing one thing and not really knowing what all is behind the curtain of that one thing.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Well, and yeah. I mean, all of that. And it's, some, like uh, when I was younger, wasn't familiar, wasn't aware of the idea of generational wealth. Um, and as I've gotten older and more aware, like that has become so much more apparent, right? That the impact that that has, again, on literally on generations. And I mean, I won't get into the whole like pull yourself up by your bootstraps and why that's all problematic, but like, but taking into account and, and it's something that I've been finding myself that when we have moments where we are maybe recipients
Mhm,
of that generational wealth or we are givers, right?
mhm.
Of we're in a position where we can give our nibblings some money towards their education. And I'm always like, congratulations. And let's name this what this is. Like
Mhm.
let's name this advantage this privilege that you have in this moment. And yeah, and I think that it can be really difficult. I'm curious to hear your thoughts about, and then how do those that context shape our internal dialogue? So, right. So obviously it has impact on how other people may view or judgments they might make or assumptions they might make. But something that, speaking from my lived experiences, and that can really shape your internal conversation around money and your internal belief around what money can do for you, should look like for you, right? And so I'm curious to hear, what do you see in your clients of, yeah, just how that also impacts our internal dialogue?
So, one of the things that I always say to people is that money is one of the longest relationships that you will have in your life.
Mm,
Next to your parents or whomever may have raised you from birth or from a young age, money is probably, again, the longest relationship that you will have. And just like your relationship with your parents today is very different than when you were a younger adult, a teenager, a child, an infant, your relationship with money will change over the course of your lifetime. And I think when it comes to context, it is understanding the context that may have shaped the beginnings of your beliefs about money,
mm,
shaped your initial behaviors with it, shaped the initial expectations of what it is that you want money to do for you. Your experiences over time either validate those or
mm,
give you another reality. So that context changes and the circumstances of those contexts of that context changes. And I think sometimes we are so stuck that we don't let it change. And just like
mm,
any other relationship in your life, even though it may go through some challenging times, a sign of it being healthy is that it changes. And so the same should be the case when it comes to our relationship with money, and similarly our relationship with our business. It should not be the same. When we look at if we're having our conversation on February 2nd, 2023, when we look at our relationship with our businesses and money today, and if you had a business 5 years ago, go back, it and hopefully it looks different, because then that means that you have incorporated the lessons from the challenges that you've bumped up against in that 5-year period. And then hopefully in 2028, God willing, you will have a different relationship with money and with your business, because whatever the lessons are that you were learning right now, you will have figured out, well, how do I incorporate that? How do I, integrate that into my decision-making process?
I feel like I'm at the Church of Jacquette right now. I mean, again, how we don't let it change it. I mean, that and part of this is it is hitting me on a really personal level, and some of it is because I have seen the consequences and the impact when the relationship and belief with money hasn't changed.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I've seen that in loved ones.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I mean, there's some deep heart hits that are happening. And boy, that point you made of a sign of it being healthy is that you should see it change. And I mean, that feels profound on multiple levels, just even outside of money, like relationships, your personal growth, right? Like all of this.
Mm-hmm.
And what a great, part of the intention of us starting this show is, what are some of those questions we should be asking ourselves? And, and what a great point of reflection, a gift you've just given us all to go, how has it changed? Has it changed enough? Am I okay with how it's changed? Has it not changed?
Right.
Right. And to evaluate that. And I don't know. I mean, I would, I'd be curious, as people are listening to this and reflecting, how many people think about the fact that it is a relationship, that there is a relationship. And to your point, it's like breathing, right? You're always thinking about, do I have enough money, or how do I want to spend the money? I mean, it's like a fish in water, and the money is water, and you don't even realize you're swimming in it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Totally.
So speaking of, so speaking of relationships, I want you to talk with us. I would like to invite you to explore that idea of intimacy, because that's not a phrase I've ever heard related with our financial success and stability. So just say more about that. I think that's such an interesting concept that you bring forward in your work.
So, financial intimacy is the title of my book. And when I wrote my book, it was to really explore the intersection of love and money, but through like a social critic's lens of going back in time. What has changed over the last 40 years, economically, politically, socially, and from a familial standpoint, that influenced how we, and especially as women, show up in relationships connected to money. And as I was exploring it, what I realized is that the intimacy wasn't there. People weren't having the right conversations. Yeah, they were talking about money, but they weren't having the conversations that were really, as one of the things that I've heard you say in some of your podcast interviews, meaningful.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, although the book was centered around couples, one of the things that I really wanted people to get from it is that you actually can't create intimacy with someone else until you've created it with yourself. And I think there's this notion, a cultural notion, that things have to be perfect. And well, one, we're humans, so we're not going to be perfect. But my whole point was that You don't have to wait until your relationship with money is perfect before you can form this perfect relationship with someone else around money. It's because it's almost like this three circle Venn diagram, right? With you, the other person, and money, and then there's this overlapping area, right? Um, but this whole notion of intimacy is that intimacy requires you to be vulnerable. It
Mm.
requires you to be mindful of the things where you are attaching self judgment to your situation, where you are projecting judgment on other people. It requires you to be real and honest with yourself about your expectations, about your beliefs, and to give yourself permission to what you want. And when I talk about intimacy, it is intimacy with self, it's intimacy with other people, but it's also recognizing that not everybody is entitled to that intimacy.
Mm.
However, we need to be more.
They're not entitled, sorry, just a point of clarification. They're not entitled to that intimacy, or they're not entitled to be aware of your intimacy?
I
When
think
you
it's a
say
little
that,
bit
what
of
do you mean?
both. I think it's a little
Yeah,
bit of
okay.
both. But I do think we need to have more transparent conversations. So, can I share a little example of what I
Yes,
mean to
please.
like
Oh,
illustrate
yes,
the
please.
difference? So, I don't know the movie that this is connected to, but the movie was with Jessica Chastain and Octavia Spencer.
Mm.
And they were having dinner one on one. And Octavia, I think, took a very bold and risky move in that she shared with Jessica how much she was getting paid for her role in the movie. Well, Jessica was aghast because she was getting paid multiples more than. And to her credit, she went to bat so that they were both on equal
Mm.
ground. They had both a transparent and intimate conversation around money because they got
Mm.
into the numbers. And you know what? The only people that know the numbers are them, their agents, and the studio. When
Mm.
Octavia shared this conversation at like an Aspen Institute event, she just told the experience of being vulnerable enough to share with someone, this is how much I'm getting paid for this movie. She didn't know how Jessica was going to respond. And yet,
Mhm.
because of that response, they were able to have a deeper conversation. So, transparency is you share the larger story so that other people can see the benefit of having conversations around
Mm.
money. The
Mm.
intimacy is no one knows what the numbers are for either one of
Mm.
them. We just know a factor, and it was X
Mm.
factor. That's it. But in the middle of both of that is power, right? Because Jessica had the power to go to bat.
Mhm.
Octavia was stayed in her own self agency and exercised her power in terms of making that choice to initiate that conversation. And then all of the other elements and, people that were involved had some degree of power to make it happen. Again, I don't know if I answered your question, but
Yeah. Well, no,
that's just an
well, I mean,
example
gosh,
for
there's
me.
yeah, that's, um, there's so many beautiful lessons in that. Well, and that also, there's a lot of talk in the workplace right now of sharing salaries, right? Sharing, right? One of the ways we can overcome pay inequities is by being much more transparent about it. And there's a lot of tension. Some people are pro like, oh, let's just be really transparent and, like, and perhaps intimate from the standpoint of like, let's share numbers and let's be real about it. And and then there's, right, other schools of thought, typically from leaders of like, you're creating a headache, so please don't. And then that intersection with power. And I don't know how we talk about relationship with finances, value. I mean, all of that, if without talking about the role power plays. I mean, we can't.
You can't. You can't. There's
Uh,
no way to omit it. There's no way, which is why I have the same reaction as you to this whole notion of pull yourself up by your bootstraps. I also
Mhm.
have a very similar reaction when, because it's Black History Month, right? And
Mhm.
so sometimes there's a lot of conversation around uh, financial literacy in Black communities, and it drives me crazy.
Mm.
I
Mm.
absolutely hate it because number one, I have issue with the term financial literacy, but number two, it makes it seem as if we are a community of people that are operating at a deficit. And it's
Yeah.
like, do you realize
Like a deficit of competence, not a deficit of resources and access to resources
well,
and power
all
and
of it,
all of that. Yeah,
all of it,
all of it.
all of
Yeah.
it, right?
Yeah.
And it's like there's no recognition of the history that goes with starting something again from nothing. There's
Yeah.
no, connection to the fact that again, history, we had communities of wealth and folks burned it
Mhm.
down and we had
Right.
to
Yeah.
rebuild again, right? And
Mhm.
so I really, really
Over and over and
over and
over again.
over, right? And so I really dislike this whole notion that doesn't that so centers personal choice, and personal choice is important, but it
Yeah.
centers it so much in the absence of the systemic
Yeah.
choices and power that those personal choices bump up against. I'm not absolving folks of their personal agency and their personal
Mm.
responsibility, but it always going back to, I feel like I overuse this word, but it always goes back to context.
Yeah. 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 I mean, there's so much you can there's I can have a bucket and I don't know if this is the right metaphor. This is what's coming up from my brain. Like, and if I'm in a container that's constantly getting water dumped on me, like there are things I can do to try to move the water out faster. But at some point when there's so much water coming in, there's only so much that I can do.
Right.
And it is real convenient. Well, it's real convenient to overlook the historic,
Yes.
and it's real, both consciously, intentionally, and unintentionally. It's really convenient.
Mhm.
Um, and again, that generational impact of constantly having to start from zero, because even if, I look at, I look at my family lineage, and, um, like every generation on some level has been able to move a little bit further, right? Like we didn't come from much, but like we're building, like every generation is building on that. And when that is completely decimated and wiped out, like it has such a significant impact, such a significant impact.
Mhm. Mhm.
All right. I We have to give space to charging your worth. When you and I had our first conversation, I said some comment, and I said it again today. And as soon as you're like, I was like, right, I forgot that call out. A lot of times we hear that phrase of like charging our worth, and you're like, I actually have a lot of issue. So talk to me about why that is a problematic statement for us to reframe, because I think it's really, really powerful and important.
Yes, thank you for, raising it here in the context of our formal conversation. So, the reason that I have a problem with charge what you're worth, and for those that are not watching on YouTube, I'm Black. My heritage is Jamaican American. And from an ancestral standpoint, I have ancestors where there was a dollar amount placed on their humanity. So
Mhm.
when I hear the phrase charge what you're worth, I have a very visceral reaction to it, even though I am probably 99.9% certain that when the person says that, that is not what they mean, but that is how I react to it. So there's the visceral reaction. But even if I set that aside, I also feel like it misses the point.
Mhm.
Because when you are charging for what it is that you are bringing to the world, whether it's a service, a product, a combination, whatever it is that you are offering, what you are charging for is the job that that offering is doing in the life of the person or the entity that's buying it. What question is it helping them to address? What frustration is it helping them to tackle? What desire is it helping them to fulfill? What challenge are you helping them to successfully overcome? Because everything that you do has two jobs: an external job of what I've just described, and it has a job within your business. So when you're charging for the complexity of how you are
Mhm.
helping them with one of those things. And yes, in terms of who you are, you're bringing yourself to that equation. You're bringing your education, both formal and informal. You're bringing your experience. You're bringing your expertise, your talents, your gifts, your perspective, all the things that make you uniquely you. You're bringing that to the table, but that is not what you're charging for. You're charging for the
Mhm.
value of the container that you are helping them do something. Because what you would charge for an hour is very different if you're charging for working with you for a year or something. So that's why I feel like it's, nails, my short nails on a chalkboard when someone says charge what you're worth, because I feel like they're missing the entire point. Even if that's not their intention, I think they miss it in terms of the language because of the mindset that shapes that language.
Yeah. That was such a provocative push, and 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 interesting, that it's such an ingrained phrase
Mm.
that, that we realized, like, oh, I'd gotten away from the, like, provocative insight and went right back into that pattern of, okay, what do we charge? Charge what we were worth. And also that, that point you made about, it's, part of it is the complexity of what you're helping them be able to resolve. And, which is why, I mean, in the spirit of, now, by the time this airs, it won't be February, but it's a good reminder for folks any time of the year. Um, if you're hiring Black speakers for Black History Month, you need to be paying them and not with exposure, because the emotional labor is also, like, substantial in the situations that, um, probably what I think the most complex situation we face as a nation is navigating racism and capitalism and patriarchy and all of those. But that is the top of it. That is the most complex. And and I know that this is, like, sometimes that, as a business owner, making sure that we see that complexity
Mm.
and can speak to that. It's kind of like, yeah, as somebody who does speak, people will be like, you charge what for an hour?
Mhm.
Oh no, this isn't an hour. And I'm going to be working with 100 leaders who, if they can leave doing this just 5% better, what value did that bring to you?
Exactly. Yeah.
And what has opened up and what has released for you? And it's, so yeah, we can talk just time. This isn't just an hour. We can talk that. We can talk lived experience. We can talk, right, all of those things. And, and if what someone is being asked to do is, really complex and emotionally complex, then, man, we better make sure that we are paying them appropriately for that.
Yeah. And can I tie this back also to something that you said earlier on, connected to like first generation and just things that are
Yeah.
new and how this shows up? So, and I'm taking this from a coaching client that I worked with. First generation, and the messaging was all about education. And so she did
Mhm.
all of the
Mm.
things, right? Ivy undergrad, Ivy business school, major consulting firm, then joined a partnership, and then went out on her own and couldn't quite understand why, when out on her own, the same scope of work that she would have done inside the partnership, she was getting pushback on in terms of the pricing.
Mm.
So there were two things that are going on, because then instead of pushing back on the pricing, understandably so,
Yeah.
she would acquiesce and she would lower, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but there are two things going on there. There was one, the self consciousness about, well,
Mhm.
I'm brown, right? In her case, she was brown,
Mhm.
and she's like, well, maybe this is all I can get. And then there was the messaging, because while she did all of the things that her family said to do from an educational standpoint, there was another message. And that other message was, don't be like those rich people. And
Yeah.
so now, from a financial standpoint, she's like those rich people. And there's a benefit to her family for that, because now she's able to take care of them in a way that she wouldn't if she didn't. But that is shaping her ability without her even knowing it. That is
Yeah.
shaping her ability to go in and negotiate and really demand a higher price point, because it's also connected to, it's not saying the same thing so explicitly, charge what you're worth. But if you
Yeah.
are harboring this message that says, don't be like those rich people, well, then that is going to stunt you when
Yeah.
you are having to negotiate on your own without the protection of a partnership or a larger consultancy that's setting the prices, and you're not the one that's negotiating, having to navigate those negotiations is what I'm trying to say. So that's why it's all connected.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you just like spoke my life. Not entirely, obviously,
Right.
like I have a different experience as a white woman, but certainly like as a woman, as a woman who grew up in a blue collar family,
Mhm.
right? Truck driver, union guy.
Mhm.
We lived down, right? People who
Mhm.
lived on the bluff, they were
Mhm.
right.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that is, I didn't even realize how some of those old tapes
Mhm.
were impacting seeing the value
Right.
and sabotaging like on it, right? Like, so you have external sabotage because, I mean, gosh, insert whatever industry, and we know that women are paid less, and then that decreases when you're a mother, and that decreases when you're Black, and that decreases when you're Hispanic, and right, like, and when you're older, and all of those factors. And so you have the external barriers you're fighting, and then like you're talking, and we have these internal barriers we're fighting.
Mhm.
What are some of the reflection questions? What are some of the reframe? Like, what's some of the internal work? Because I assume there are other people who are like, yep, I know that tape. Yep. I, even I was joking with somebody. I was like just last night I said, I don't fit in like luxury hotels. Like I feel like they can see the dirt under my nails. Like there's like, right, which is like old
Mhm.
tapes from
Mhm.
um being lower income and growing up. But what are some of the reframes and questions we can be asking so we can release some of that? Because it's like we can fight the structure and we can continue pushing and doing all that and hopefully making as much movement with it. But let's not make it harder by creating an internal barrier. So how do we overcome that?
There's an exercise that I do with clients, and I call it 5 and 5. And the top 5 is inviting people to think about the 5 people that they spend the most time with. What are those relationships, and in what ways do those relationships energize you or deplete you? The bottom 5 are 5 people that are running around in your head. You may not even know them. You may not have ever had a conversation with them, but they're running around in your head, influencing how you think, what you think is possible, all kinds of stuff. Like, write that down as well. And
Mm.
again, who is the person? Maybe it's someone you know, maybe it's a beloved that's no longer with us, or maybe it's someone that you know, but for whatever reason you're not on speaking terms, and yet they're still, again, running around in your head. And like with the top 5, how do they energize you and how do they deplete you of energy? And then ask yourself the question, if if my business were a person, which of
Mm.
these relationships would it most reflect? If the way I think about sales, which of these relationships would it most reflect? If the way I think about pricing and how I approach pricing, which relationships would this most reflect? And it's not to make anybody, you know, beat up on any of those relationships if you're like, oh
Right,
my
right,
God,
right,
right? But
right.
it is to be aware so that you can figure out what do you need to do so that that relationship is not hurting you. And here's why I came up with the exercise, because I realized that my relationship, or a better way of putting it, the absence of my relationship with my father was showing up in my sales process. Everybody knows that in sales, part of the deal is you got to follow up. And I would get to the point where I was just like, oh, I want them to choose me, right? And so I had this really weird relationship with the follow-up process, because it was more coming from the standpoint of them choosing me as opposed to it being a mutual selection. And I had to design a follow-up process that really protected me from crossing that line, from feeling like I was begging to be chosen. And I don't think we sometimes think about the ways in which the relationships that are in our lives, both literally and just perhaps even just figuratively in our head, shapes just how we navigate this business world of ours. And so I came up with that exercise because I was like, oh,
good.
shoot, I went to therapy. I thought I had this outfit. Clearly not.
Oh, like my head hurts because this is so good. And I just want to go and spend time and reflect on this. But it makes so much sense, because we know, right, that like these tapes, our default patterns don't just get shaped by us, they get shaped by those around us. Now, and a lot of our tapes are from when we were children, and right, we don't even realize that. Where this is something I'm unpacking with my therapy and reflecting on, and just how does it show up? Like when is young Sarah actually reacting versus like old Sarah, like current Sarah? Could it also be valuable to reframe what's the relationship you like want to exhibit that? Does that make sense? Like if
Yeah. It totally does. And I totally get where you're going. And it's interesting because whenever someone comes to me and they are beating themselves up, either for what they feel they're not doing, or maybe the numbers are, the results are in the numbers, they're not doing well.
Yeah.
I will always invite them to think about, well, who do you think is doing it right? And what are they doing right? And you have the benefit of it being a relative that you can actually have a conversation with around, well, how are you doing this? And what do you do in this scenario versus this scenario? Others don't necessarily have that, but even still, you can make some assumptions, and that's what they would be if you can't get them verified. But you can make some assumptions about, oh, I see this person over here and their business looks like X, and I want that, or I want something similar to that. And I think that they're making these choices that can be just as valuable as literally being able to have a conversation with someone to know precisely what choices did they make, why they choose A over B or B over A. Like that is incredibly valuable. And so, yeah, I definitely think being able to also tap into, well, who do I want to be like, is beneficial. Because you know what you might discover is that, oh, I like their result, but I don't like their trade-off.
Also accurate. Exactly. Also incredibly accurate. Well, and I think that a trap that can happen, I love you so much. Also, I think a trap that can happen is in looking towards someone or an organization or whatever, is to make sure that you don't get into the comparison game, right? Of like, oh, they've figured this out, they're doing this, that, right? Like, because that can be a real easy shame spiral to fall into, but it is. And so that's a catch, right? I think that's a catch with it. And boy, it speaks to how, especially for business owners, people who are listening to this, but again, like, and it doesn't even have to be business owners. Like, we, like sexual intimacy, we don't talk about financial intimacy.
Mhm.
And then you're left just going like, is there something wrong with me? Is there something like wrong with us? Is there something? And then you talk to other people like, oh, you struggle with this too? Or, oh, I actually think this is normal and what we see on TV is not accurate, or whatever the case is. Like, so how do we, like part of what I'm holding on to is just continuing to build out those relationships, because they're so important. They're so valuable, because otherwise, like when you're in your own head, right, that's when the shame can come in. That's when the frustration. And then I feel like when shame comes in, doubt follows real closely behind, like real
Absolutely.
close behind.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
and you're right. I mean, I have realized actually that when I am feeling doubt as a business owner, um, I have a few people who I've identified that the minute I start spiraling, I go, nope, okay, wait. These are people who will be honest with me, who will be intimate with me. I love applying that language there,
Mhm.
transparent, um, and that can stop it. And so that's also, like how do we have these conversations, about again, and I love that point you made of, we can even have like an intimate conversation without like the explicit numbers always too, right? Like
Yeah.
I'm thinking about when I was, I don't know, my late 20s, and a good friend of ours, was like, my goal is to be financially independent. And I
Mhm.
remember being like, what's that?
Mhm.
I don't know
Mhm.
what that is.
Mhm.
So what are you all doing?
Right.
And just, and I didn't know a number, but we started having this great conversation. I was like, wow, I didn't even know that was a possibility. I didn't
Mhm.
even know that was a concept. I didn't know that was something you can strive towards. And being, open to talking about those things
Mhm.
is such a valuable gift. I'm just yeah, just reflecting on how important that is, and trying to be even more intentional about that.
Yeah, and if I can even just add, with the intimacy without necessarily diving into the numbers. So, I'm a single child and raised by a single mother. My parents separated when I was 2, but they didn't get divorced until I was 13, but father not very
Hmm.
present. Um, I say all of this to say that my mother was first a professional musician. And then when they separated, she wound down her uh, working as a professional musician because she was traveling all over the country and, leaving me with the babysitter. So all that is to say, she retired and started working for Social Security. So my mother was a federal employee for 38 years. I say all of this because of this. Even though we didn't come from a private banking background, my mother was hell bent on making sure that she had her estate planning done and
Mm,
all of that. And so she did. And I look at that as, a gift of love because it allowed me when she
mm,
died to grieve uninterrupted because things were taken care of
mm,
that I didn't have to try to like figure out afterward. But when you talk about the intimacy without the numbers, the one thing I did not know was that my mother didn't have a mortgage. I did not find that
ah,
out until she died because I inherited everything. But
yeah.
not only the gift of her doing the estate planning process, but the gift of not having a mortgage. And I think about how the hell did she do that on a
Mm,
social security salary? Right. But I didn't know the numbers. And so I just
yeah.
share that as an example of you're right, the intimacy, because clearly I knew about the estate planning and all of that because I was a part of the process, but I did not know that detail. And so you can still have those, rich, meaningful conversations and still leave a piece of the puzzle out and it still
Mm.
be intimate.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, like, was I, was that accurate of me actually, as I was reflecting of like, well, or what are you potentially missing out on, right? Or and it, and I get it. It, it can be incredibly vulnerable. I mean, it actually is very vulnerable, whether that is I don't know, having conversations around debt, having conversations around how much you spent on something, having conversations around salary, having conversation, in my world, like our world, right? I remember starting out and some people I was really fortunate to have one of my good friends, Alan Fire. He was like, I will tell you exactly what I charged from day one, and I will tell you where I'm at now, and I will tell you where I'm going or where I want to go.
Hmm?
And he said because so many people wouldn't share that with
Right.
me because they held it so close to their chest. And I just had a conversation this morning with somebody who wants to get into coaching. I said, I'm an open book.
Mm-hmm.
We need to have these
Me too.
conversations. We need to push it, but I get why it's so vulnerable because will people think that I'm charging too much? Will people think that I'm like they'll pass judgment on me because I, have debt and like how did you get out of it and how
Mm-hmm.
do you, right, like
Mm-hmm.
manage it? And boy, we have so much additional suffering because we aren't having the conversations we need to, again, either with ourselves about this or other people. And I just keep tying it into like relationship intimacy and how, again, how much like loneliness or suffering or doubt, unnecessary doubt
Right.
is happening because we aren't talking about this.
Yeah,
Well,
it's awkward. But you know what? I think part of the problem is somewhere along the line, we were sold that it shouldn't be awkward. And that's why we're not comfortable with it being awkward. It's not supposed to be easy. It's not supposed to be, comfortable. And if we just embraced it, it would make it a lot easier. But somehow or another, culturally, the message is all this stuff, all this human stuff is somehow supposed to be easy. It's supposed to be pop it in the microwave
Yeah.
for 30 seconds and it's going to come out just juicy.
Or as one of my clients would say, her mother would say 12 seconds. Everything can be heated properly in 12 seconds. Well, and I want to yes and it. Like, yes, yeah, that's such an astute point. And sometimes I think we have made it seem like a bigger boogie monster, like not like my child, like a bigger monster than it actually is. And we've like we doubt our ability to sit in the discomfort of it, right? It's like, no, you do not talk about this.
Right.
That is the taboo subject because, right. I think you're absolutely right in that it is like, well, no, it should be easy and it should be right. Like, I don't talking about your needs in a relationship. Like, well, look at what happened in that movie and then they're married and their kids and nobody's talking about the,
Yep.
guy that the woman left, right? We're not talking about his pain because like this is just, and she's not leaving with guilt. But I'm always fascinated with that. Like, let's see the, you're absolutely right. And then sometimes I feel like we've made it a bigger thing than it needs to be, and we've lost the words are escaping me right now. But I think that we underestimate our efficacy in sitting in the discomfort.
Right.
Right. It's like it's gonna be uncomfortable. And we don't think we can handle it, or we don't think the other person can handle it. And that I think can be, like just as damaging as well. And so it's, I mean, hopefully the lesson that I know, like I continue to sit with is just like, step into it, trust that, and yeah, sometimes it's risky.
But when you said the word trust, it reminded me that so much of that is trusting ourselves.
Yeah.
And sometimes that can be more difficult for some than for others. And so
100%.
It's a matter of building up that self-trust muscle.
Which is, all the work that you do with people, right?
Yeah.
In the ways that you help them reconnect with. What I do, I so value and appreciate your approach to something that so often is treated so transactionally, you approach it so transformationally because it is and it can be. And
Right.
so I just thank you for the work that you do. And,
Aw.
you know, I know I want to ask you our last question, but I do just want to, I am sitting in such deep gratitude and appreciation that our paths have crossed and you're doing the work you're doing, how you're doing it. And for people who are listening, you can work with her. This is something you're thinking about. You can, you see that. All right. So before we get to how people can reach out to you who want to learn more about the work you're doing and how you can support them, I always want to honor by asking the last question we ask all of our guests, which is, what is a conversation, Jacquette, that you have had with yourself or with someone else that was transformative? Doesn't need to be the most, but just what's one?
Does a conversation with my therapist count?
Oh, yeah. Because that's like both yourself and someone else and someone who's not in the room. So it's like a whole family dinner.
Exactly. So, a conversation with my therapist, and it was reframing something that I thought was a negative and turning it into a positive. And so for a variety of reasons, I've always felt like an outsider. And through our work, I'm beginning to embrace that and appreciate that and to recognize how that actually has been a blessing for me in my work and the body of work that I've been able to build over the last 30 plus years. And so I think it's recognizing that what I initially felt like, oh, I'm the outsider again, has really been beneficial. And so it's that reframing.
No, I love that. I mean, you have such a valuable perspective on the balcony, right? To see patterns and to see interactions. Thank you for sharing that. How can people connect with you? What is the best way for folks to connect with you who are interested in getting your book, checking out your podcast, working with you?
I'm going to suggest that folks go to my website, jacquettetimmons.com, and more specifically, jacquettetimmons.com/wheel, and do the financial wheel exercise, which is free. But the purpose of doing the financial wheel exercise is that it helps you to either connect or reconnect with the financial vision of what it is that you want money to do for you. And that can just help to shape so many decisions, because you can do the exercise and then ask yourself the question, if I change nothing about my business model, sales process, and pricing, can I make this vision a reality? And if the answer is no, it gives you an immediate feedback on what you can do to change that. And if you're listening and you don't own a business, it's still really valuable, because we all need to be connected with our vision and give ourselves permission to imagine what it is we want money to do for us. So that's what I would invite people to do. And I love me some Instagram. So I'm still there. Come follow me on Instagram or LinkedIn.
Awesome.
But yeah, that's how folks can be in touch.
Well, we will be sure to post your website, and then we can post that specific link in the show notes. We'll send folks to your various social accounts. Again, I mean, let me know what we owe you for this hour of
you know what?
my personal coaching. I feel like I left with some I think I've got my next conversation with my therapist plotted out of what I'm going to start unpacking.
Oh my God. I'm just so grateful, because I've been looking forward to this since we first chatted, and shout out to Neha who introduced us. So I'm just so grateful. So thank you.
Oh, no, I feel like the pleasure is all mine in this. So thank you so much for saying yes to the show. And again, just thank you for all the work you do. And
thank you for yours.
Just grateful to have you here.
Mutual love fest.
Our guest this week has been Jacquette Timmons. And I'm not sure if I've ever been speechless as often as I have in that conversation, because there was so much that she was sharing that was new perspectives and hitting things. Gosh, one of the things that really is resonating for me is that idea of a sign of a healthy relationship with finances is that our relationship with it should change. And that's such a gift, not only thinking about it with relationships, but really thinking about it with all aspects of our life. We should be evolving as people. We should be evolving in how we view ourselves. We should be evolving in the relationships we have with our spouses, our partners, our friends, our family members. And what a gift that is to just reflect and go, am I moving forward? Is it different? That was just a significant gift she brought to this conversation. I just want to have a conversation now about this conversation by myself, but I won't, because we're closing the show down now. But we do want to hear from you. We love hearing from you. Let us know what resonated. What were ahas for you? What was coming up for you as you heard our conversation? You can always reach out to us at podcast@sarahnollwilson.com. You can also find me on social media, where my DMs are always open. And if you'd like to find out more about the work we do and how we can help your team have conversations that matter, check us out at sarahnollwilson.com. You can also pick up a copy of my latest book, Don't Feed the Elephants, wherever books are sold. And if you'd like to support the show, which we always appreciate, please consider becoming a patron. You can visit patreon.com/conversationsonconversations, where not only your financial support will sustain this podcast and our amazing team, you'll also get access to some pretty great swag. And if you haven't already, please be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the show on your preferred podcast platform. This helps us increase our visibility so we can continue to bring on just amazing guests like Jacquette. I want to do a big thank you to our incredible team that makes the podcast possible, to our producer, Nick Wilson, to our sound editor, Drew Knoll, to our transcriptionist, Becky Reinert, our marketing consultant, Caitlin Semmett-Nelson, and the rest of the Snowcoat crew. And just a final thank you to Jacquette Timmons for coming on the show, for sharing so openly and leaving us all with incredible gifts so we can change the relationship and the conversations we're having around our finances. This has been Conversations on Conversations. Thank you all so much for listening. And remember, when we can change the conversations we have with ourselves and others, we can change the world. So be sure to rest, rehydrate, and we will see you again next week.